I thought walking in on my wife with another man was the worst moment of my life, but it turned out to be the beginning of something far greater. Betrayal led me to revenge, and revenge led me to a love I never expected. Growing up, I always held a deep belief in the sacred nature of love and marriage. To me, it symbolized something pure, unwavering, a bond built on trust and a shared commitment. My parents, who had been together for decades, were the embodiment of this ideal. Their partnership was filled with respect and love, and I was certain their example would shield me from ever experiencing heartbreak. But as I would come to learn, life has a cruel way of dismantling even the strongest convictions. When I met Rachel, I genuinely thought I'd found my forever. She seemed like everything I had ever hoped for, intelligent, witty, and effortlessly beautiful. We were inseparable, crafting a life together filled with laughter and dreams we both shared, or at least, I thought we did. Looking back now, it's painfully clear how naive I was, how blind I had been to the small signs of trouble. Those subtle red flags that I chose to ignore turned out to be the harbingers of a betrayal that would unravel my world. The day I discovered Rachel's infidelity, the life I had built came crashing down. It felt as though the foundation of everything I believed in was shattered, leaving me clinging to the broken pieces of my once cherished ideals. A year has passed since that fateful day. My marriage ended in betrayal, and I walked away with nothing but the solitary life divorce left behind. With no children to focus on or family nearby for support, loneliness became my constant shadow. It was in that isolation, ironically, that a dangerous new obsession took root. I found myself drawn to another man's wife. Whether it was out of love, desire, or some twisted sense of justice, I couldn't fully understand my own motivations. But one thing was certain, revenge had become my driving force. This wasn't just any man's wife. She belonged to the same man who destroyed my marriage by having an affair with Rachel. The thought of taking something precious from him, of making him feel the same devastation, consumed me. Her name is Claire. She works in the same building as I do, and I often see her during lunch breaks. I've pieced together what little I know about her, enough to feed my growing obsession. She's about 30, petite but curvy, often dressed in fitted clothes that accentuate her figure. Her husband. He strikes me as oblivious, a man who doesn't appreciate what he has. And yet, that man, George, was the one who slept with my wife. It's almost poetic, in a dark and twisted way, that my plans for vengeance now revolve around her. The memory of how my marriage ended still haunts me. I had come home early that day, unannounced. As I stepped into the house, I heard sounds coming from the bedroom. My pulse quickened, and when I opened the door, the sight before me confirmed my worst fears. Rachel was with another man. She screamed, and he, caught in the act, barely registered what was happening before I grabbed him. Rage took over, and I threw him out of the bed and onto the floor, landing punch after punch while Rachel continued to scream. After dragging him to the front door, I tossed his keys and wallet into the yard, leaving his clothes behind. He stumbled to his car and drove away, disheveled and humiliated. I hadn't seen him again, until fate cruelly brought him back into my life in the form of Claire's husband. Rachel, meanwhile, scrambled to dress, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, this isn't what it looks like. Please, we can fix this," she cried. I cut her off, my voice colder than I'd ever heard it. "Not what it looks like. Did you sleep with him or not? It's a simple question." When she couldn't answer, I knew there was no point in continuing the conversation. "You have 1 hour to pack and leave," I told her. "If you're still here when I get back, I'll throw you out myself." 2 hours later, I returned to find that she had left. Most of her belongings were gone, but she had left a note on the counter. At first, I didn't want to read it. But curiosity got the better of me. Rachel's letter was filled with regret. She confessed to meeting Jim, her high school boyfriend, at the mall, where old memories resurfaced. "I don't know what I was thinking," she wrote. "It was a mistake. He means nothing to me. Please, Kevin, take me back. I love you. But her words did nothing to change the pain I felt. Not long after, I received a call from Rachel's father, George. He tried to intervene, but I shut him down. George, your daughter betrayed me. She's gone, and that's final. I don't forgive, and I won't forget. Stay out of it. Then I hung up. 2 days later, Rachel's sister, Karen, reached out. She begged me to give Rachel another chance. But by then, it was far too late. My marriage was over, and my focus had shifted to something darker, something I still struggle to understand. I told Karen to speak her mind, though my patience was already thin. She barely began talking about how sorry Rachel was when I cut her off. I don't care how sorry she claims to be, I snapped. If you've come here to plead her case, save your breath. Karen hesitated but quickly moved on, knowing I wouldn't tolerate any defense of Rachel. At this point, I had no intention of reconciling. Instead, I focused on tying up loose ends. Rachel's belongings had been sitting in the house long enough, and I decided it was time to clear them out. I called Karen to pick them up, warning her that if she didn't, I'd throw everything out. She agreed to come by that evening, and I made one thing clear: Rachel wasn't welcome. When Karen arrived, she was alone, just as I had requested. I greeted her curtly and asked about her husband, mostly out of politeness. She waved it off, saying he was busy, though it was clear she didn't want to dwell on the topic. But the atmosphere between us shifted. We both knew why she had come, and it wasn't just to pick up Rachel's things. We went into the bedroom where Rachel's boxes were piled. As Karen reached for one, I stopped her. My voice was low but firm. You haven't paid for it yet, I said. She froze, staring at me as the weight of the moment sank in. In the weeks that followed, life continued with its strange twists. I began noticing Claire, George's wife, more frequently at a nearby restaurant. She often came in with a group of friends, laughing and seemingly carefree. One of her companions was Marcia, someone I knew casually. We'd exchange polite greetings, and it was clear she had heard about my divorce. News traveled fast in our tight-knit community. One day, Marcia came to the restaurant alone, and I invited her to join me for lunch. She hesitated but eventually agreed. We talked about her family, her husband's recent promotion, and the general ups and downs of life. When the conversation turned to me, she asked how I was holding up after the divorce. I gave her a brief, guarded answer, though my mind was already spinning with plans centered around Claire. Marcia's connection to Claire offered an opening I couldn't ignore. Not long after, I approached Claire directly when I saw her sitting alone at the restaurant. Introducing myself as Marcia's friend, I tried to put her at ease. Claire smiled warmly and introduced herself. I invited her to sit with me, joking that she'd have to cover her own lunch, which made her laugh. As we talked, she shared small details about her life. Her husband, Jim, had transferred to the area a little over a year ago. She mentioned how their start here had been rough. Jim had been attacked and robbed by 2 men, leaving him with stitches. Hearing her talk about Jim, I couldn't help but feel my anger resurface. I wondered if he was back to his old ways, possibly even with Rachel again. But Claire's openness disarmed me. She had a warmth that was hard to ignore, and despite my original intentions, I found myself genuinely drawn to her. One day, as Claire confided in me, she revealed a fear that had been eating away at her. Kevin, she whispered, I think my husband might be cheating on me. But I don't know for sure. Her vulnerability hit me harder than I expected. I reached out and took her trembling hand, trying to offer comfort. The thought of anyone neglecting such a kind and wonderful woman infuriated me. My mind raced with the possibility that Jim might still be involved with Rachel, and I knew I needed to tell Claire the truth about what had happened between them. Claire, I said, we need to talk privately. Will you meet me after work? She hesitated, her eyes wide with apprehension. Kevin, I can't go to your apartment. What would people think? This is important, I replied earnestly. I care about you too much to let this go unsaid. After a long pause, she agreed. When we finally sat down to talk, the weight of my confession hung heavy in the air. Claire, I began, my original plan was revenge. I wanted to hurt Jim the way he hurt me, by taking you away from him. But things have changed. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Claire's face crumpled, and she covered it with her hands as tears began to fall. You're saying Jim, he's the man you caught Rachel with? She asked, her voice barely audible. I nodded. Yes, but that's not the only reason I'm here. I love you, Claire. And while I wanted revenge, I can't bring myself to hurt you. My feelings for you are real. She wept silently, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Kevin, I don't know what to say. I don't love Jim anymore, not after everything I've discovered. What do you mean? I asked. Claire explained that she had uncovered hidden emails and files on Jim's computer, confirming his infidelity. After everything, I think I hate him. I feel so used, she confessed. Hearing her say those words, I knew this was a turning point, for both of us. I'm cautious about you too, Kevin, Claire said, her voice soft but trembling slightly. I gave her hands a reassuring squeeze, encouraging her to continue. I've been going over everything in my head, especially about that reunion Jim went to earlier this year. I couldn't go with him because of a business trip, but I even offered to take him along. He said he'd rather stay and catch up with old friends. At the time, I didn't think anything of it. But now it all makes sense. She reached into her bag and pulled out a stack of printed emails, sliding them across the table to me. These, she began, pointing at the first few pages, are the messages Jim and Rachel exchanged before the reunion. They're not romantic, but you can see the intent, they were making plans to meet. And these, she continued, gesturing to another set of pages, are from during the reunion. By the time you caught them months later, they'd already been involved for a while. A sharp anger coursed through me as I skimmed through the emails. The audacity of it, how casually they schemed behind our backs, was infuriating. How long have you had these? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. Not long, Claire replied. After we talked, I couldn't stop thinking about everything you said. So, I started digging. Jim had an old email account he probably thought I didn't know about. These were hidden there. You were right, Kevin, I was blind to so much. As I read on, I noticed something strange. Rachel had been using her maiden name in some of the emails. I pointed it out to Claire. When did she start using her maiden name again? And look at this phone number, when was it activated? Claire leaned over to take a closer look. Based on what I found, she started using that phone about a month before you walked in on them. It explains how they kept everything hidden for so long. And why Rachel didn't push harder during the divorce. She knew if this came out, it would destroy her case. I set the papers down and looked directly at Claire. But what about you? I asked. You're still married. What do you want us to do? I deliberately stressed the word us. Claire hesitated, her lips trembling as she took a deep breath. Kevin, I care about you. I really do. But I can't sleep with you, not yet. If I do that now, I'm no better than Jim or Rachel. I need to end things with Jim the right way first. The next day, instead of meeting for lunch as usual, Claire and I visited several banks. She had access to the joint credit card she shared with Jim, and we carefully withdrew thousands of dollars in cash advances. Claire was incredibly strategic, never maxing out any single card to avoid suspicion, leaving enough room for Jim to use them without immediately realizing what she'd done. This bought her time, at least a month, to make financial arrangements and prepare for the next steps. That evening, as she was getting into her car, I asked playfully, do I get another kiss? She smiled warmly, stepping closer. Wrapping her arms around me, she leaned in, and her lips met mine in a kiss that was both tender and intense. When she pulled away, her eyes sparkled with a mix of affection and mischief. "Damn, you're good," she teased. "See you tomorrow." The next day, Claire and I met again to finalize our plans. While she admitted she was falling for me, she was clear about her boundaries. "I care about you, Kevin," she said softly, "but I can't let my emotions cloud my judgment. I need to deal with Jim first, cleanly and decisively." I respected her resolve, though it only deepened my commitment to helping her find justice. I reached out to Louis, an old acquaintance of mine with a knack for handling complicated situations. When I explained what I needed, he chuckled. "You know this isn't going to be cheap, right?" he said. I nodded, fully aware of the cost. Louis agreed to help, on the condition I paid him up front. Claire and I met one final time to confirm the details. I reassured her that no harm would come to her reputation. "I'll handle everything," I promised. "You won't have to worry about a thing." Her expression softened, and her voice wavered slightly as she said, "Kevin, I think I'm really falling for you." "Then trust me," I replied. "Take a couple of days off. Everything has to go exactly as planned." "What's the plan?" she asked, her tone steady despite the tension between us. "Wednesday," I began. "Room 109 at the motel. Jim and Rachel booked it. I'll set up a remote camera there in the morning and prepare everything before they arrive." On Wednesday afternoon, I drove to the motel to finalize the arrangements. Louis had come through, providing equipment, backup plans, and even contingencies for the unexpected. The receptionist handed me the key without question, mentioning the room was reserved for later that day. I thanked her, a grim satisfaction settling in. This wasn't just about exposing Jim and Rachel, it was about reclaiming control, finding closure, and creating a path forward for Claire and me, free from the shadows of betrayal. I met up with Claire for lunch at a quiet restaurant downtown. The atmosphere was nice, and the food was even better, but I couldn't shake my curiosity about Rachel's sister, Karen. She hadn't reached out or even attempted to approach us since everything unfolded. Claire and I finished lunch and headed to an electronics store to purchase the equipment we needed. As we left the store, Claire glanced at me with a smile and said, "You know, that kiss at the restaurant? It was real. Not about Rachel or Karen, just us." Her words stayed with me, cutting through the weight of everything else. By Wednesday morning, the tension was palpable. Both Claire and I were on edge. Revenge plans are nerve-wracking, timing had to be perfect, and there was no room for mistakes. Claire met with her lawyer, Sally, to ensure the divorce papers were in order while I drove to the motel to set up the video equipment. Room 109 was already reserved under Jim's name, and Louis had ensured everything was ready to go. I positioned one camera discreetly above the light fixture and another inside a modified fire alarm. Both were pinhole cameras with excellent video and audio quality. After confirming the setup, I left the room to wait with Claire. At 4:45 p.m., Claire and I parked the van in a lot with a clear view of the motel entrance. Right at 5 p.m., Jim arrived and entered the room. My pulse quickened, this was the moment we'd been waiting for. By 5:15 p.m., Louis, Sally, and a third accomplice, Sue, entered the room. Sally knocked, and we remotely turned on the cameras, capturing everything. Louis opened the door to a confused Jim, who tried to hide his surprise. Just as planned, Sally walked in with the commanding presence of someone who knew she was in charge. Moments later, there was another knock at the door. This time, it was Rachel. Rachel hesitated at first, but the email Jim had sent her about a surprise led her to believe this was part of whatever he had planned. Louis, calm and persuasive, assured her that everything was under control and invited her in. Tentatively, she stepped inside. As the scene unfolded, Claire entered the room with Sally by her side. Her demeanor was calm but authoritative. Standing directly in front of Jim, she addressed him with a steady voice. "Jim, meet my lawyer, Sally Hawke," Claire said. "She'll explain the divorce terms. I expect the process to start tonight so I can finally be free of you, and your girlfriend." Both Jim and Rachel scrambled to gather their clothes, their faces flushed with embarrassment and panic. There was no time to hide their shame, let alone try to clean up the obvious mess they'd created. Sally cleared her throat, taking control of the situation. "I'm Sally Hawke, Claire's lawyer," she began, her voice sharp and professional. "These are the terms of the divorce. If you don't sign them tonight, we'll pursue this in court, where we'll seek these terms plus half of your pension." Jim tried to argue, his tone defensive. "If I don't sign tonight, what are you going to do?" Sally didn't miss a beat. "This offer will be off the table in 5 minutes when I leave. At that point, we'll proceed with litigation. Frankly, this is in your best interest, I suggest you take it." Claire, calm but resolute, stepped toward the closet, retrieving a videotape from the VCR. Holding it up, she said, "This is today's recording. It will be part of the divorce proceedings." Jim's face turned crimson as he spat back, "You can't use that, it was recorded without my consent." Sally let out a sharp laugh. "You really are a fool, aren't you?" she said. "This evidence is admissible, given the circumstances. If you have questions, contact me directly. In the meantime, you are not to bother Claire under any circumstances, or I'll ensure you're arrested. Now, sign the documents. Once you do, I'll provide you with a copy of the tape and the joint credit cards." Jim hesitated for a long moment, then finally relented, signing the divorce papers with trembling hands. Sally handed him a copy and added, "Claire has 24 hours to collect her belongings. The divorce is no fault and must be finalized within 2 months." Claire and I left the motel together, the weight of the day lifting slightly from her shoulders. It wasn't a clean victory, but it was enough. Jim and Rachel were exposed, and Claire could finally begin to rebuild her life without him. Jim finally relented, signing the divorce papers with a mixture of anger and resignation. Sally handed him a copy and packed up the remaining documents. Without wasting another moment, she and Claire left the motel room, their composure unshaken. Big Louie, true to his part in the plan, handed Jim the videotape with a smirk before exiting to rejoin his entourage in the parking lot. As Claire and Sally returned to the van where I was waiting, I caught a glimpse of Claire's expression, relieved but still heavy with the weight of what had just transpired. Sally turned to me with a knowing look. "You played your part well, Kevin," she said. "Now it's on Claire to move forward. Stay patient." I nodded, realizing Sally was right. The hard part was over for now, but the next steps would take time, and my involvement couldn't be obvious. I leaned toward Claire and kissed her gently. "Take care of yourself," I said. "Once the divorce is finalized, let me know. I'll wait for you." Claire smiled faintly, her eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "Thank you, Kevin," she whispered before getting out of the van with Sally. They had already arranged for a moving truck to pick up Claire's things that day, and Sally promised to see her home safely. "Call me if you need updates or have any questions," Sally said as she climbed into her car. Once they drove off, I returned to the motel room to retrieve the equipment. The cameras and recordings had done their job perfectly. Glancing at the monitor one last time, I noticed that Jim and Rachel had also left. The scene was over. I packed everything up and left, satisfied that the day's events had gone according to plan. A few days later, I received a call from Sally with updates about Claire. She sounded upbeat as she recounted how smoothly things were progressing. "Claire has moved into a nice apartment close to her job," Sally said. "She took about half the items from her old place to furnish her new home. She's doing well but has been advised not to mention you to avoid raising suspicion." Sally chuckled as she added, "Oh, and here's some news that might make you smile, Jim and Rachel both contracted syphilis. Apparently, his lawyer mentioned they need treatment and can't, until they're cleared. A little poetic justice, wouldn't you say? I couldn't help but laugh. It was a small, ironic victory, but it felt fitting. Thanks for the update, Sally. It's good to know Claire is settling in. She's strong, Kevin. Give her time. I'll let her know you're doing well too. 2 days before Christmas, I returned to my apartment after a trip to Chicago. The city had been a welcome distraction, and things had gone well professionally, but my thoughts often drifted to Claire. That evening, I decided to call Sally for a final update. Sally Hawk speaking, she answered, her tone warm and familiar. Great to hear your voice, Sally, I said. I just wanted to check in and see how everything is going with Claire's case. Kevin. It's so good to hear from you, she said. The divorce was finalized 2 days ago. Claire's officially free. A wave of relief washed over me. That's great news, I said. Could I get her phone number to reach out? Sally hesitated. I can't give you her number directly, Kevin, but I'll let her know you called. She can decide from there. I understood her caution. Thank you, Sally. I appreciate everything you've done. Good luck, Kevin, she said. I hope things work out for you both. The next day, I stopped by Claire's workplace, hoping to catch her and surprise her with a simple holiday gesture. To my disappointment, her coworker Mara informed me that Claire had left early for an extended holiday break. She won't be back until next week, Mara said. I forced a smile and wished Mara a Merry Christmas, asking her to send my regards to Claire. The holiday spirit around me did little to lift my mood as I headed back to my apartment. The place felt quiet, almost too still. I checked my answering machine, but there was nothing, no messages, no signs of Claire. I was starting to feel the weight of disappointment settle when the phone suddenly rang. My heart leapt, hoping it was her. But when I answered, it was just a telemarketer. Frustrated, I hung up and sat in the silence, longing for the call I truly wanted. I slammed the phone down onto the table, frustration coursing through me. The disappointment of the telemarketer call still lingered, but I reminded myself that Claire might call me soon. It wasn't necessary for her to do so, other agents could have updated her investments while I was away, but part of me hoped she'd find a reason to reach out anyway. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. It was Mary, my kind and dependable housekeeper, who cleaned my apartment twice a week. She stood in the doorway, holding a tray of holiday cookies and a stack of mail. Mary, come on in for a moment, I said, smiling at her gesture. She stepped inside, her face lighting up with warmth. Happy holidays, Kevin, she said, handing me the cookies. Thought you might enjoy these. Wait right here, Mary, I said, walking to the bedroom. I returned with an envelope containing 3 crisp $100 bills. This is for you, Merry Christmas. Her eyes widened in surprise. Thank you, Kevin, she said, her smile radiating gratitude. You're too kind. After Mary left, I stood by the door for a moment, thinking to myself how the world needed more wonderful people like her. I felt a little lighter, her kindness easing the lingering frustration from earlier. Later that evening, as I was contemplating dinner, there was another knock at the door. I opened it to find Claire standing there, her cheeks rosy from the cold and her smile hesitant but hopeful. My heart skipped a beat. Kevin, she said, her voice soft yet full of emotion. I needed to see you. Can I come in? I stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. Of course, I said. She walked in, taking off her coat and holding it awkwardly in her hands. I wasn't sure what to say, and now I can't think straight, she admitted with a small laugh. But I have a couple of things to tell you, and we should eat while it's hot. I know you hate cold pizza. I chuckled, my heart swelling at her thoughtfulness. You brought pizza. You're the best, I said, taking the box from her and setting it on the table. "Big guy, I missed you too," she said, her tone softening. "In case you didn't know, I'm officially divorced. I heard today that you were back, and I didn't want to leave a message, it felt too impersonal. I needed to see you in person." She hesitated for a moment, then added, "I left work early after Sally called to let me know you were home. Oh, and I brought you a Christmas gift. But you'll have to wait until after dinner to see it." Dinner felt effortless, as though no time had passed between us. We talked and laughed, the connection between us undeniable. Afterward, Claire stood up and retrieved a small wrapped box from her bag, handing it to me with a shy smile. "Merry Christmas," she said. I opened it to find a beautiful leather-bound notebook, elegant and simple. "Claire, this is perfect," I said, running my fingers over the cover. She smiled. "I thought you might use it to start fresh, new year, new beginnings." I set the notebook down, taking her hands in mine. "Claire, there's something I need to ask you," I said, my voice trembling slightly. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small velvet box, opening it to reveal a ring. Her eyes filled with tears as I said, "If you'll marry me." She gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Then she burst into tears and threw herself into my arms, her warm, soft body pressing against mine. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I'll marry you. Yes, yes, yes. I love you so much," I whispered as I held her tightly, my heart pounding with joy. I lifted her into my arms, carrying her to the bedroom. Gently, I laid her down on the bed, the glow of her smile filling the room. She looked up at me, her eyes brimming with warmth and anticipation. "This is our first time," I said softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I want it to be perfect." She reached for me, her touch sending shivers through me. "It already is," she said, her voice full of love and trust. I kissed her gently, savoring the moment, knowing that this was the beginning of everything I had ever wanted. "I'll help if I can," Sally said, her tone amused and curious. "Claire and I want to get married as soon as possible," I explained, my voice carrying a mix of excitement and urgency. "But tomorrow is Christmas Eve. Do you know a judge who can help us?" Sally laughed warmly. "So Claire finally called you, huh? I'm thrilled for you both. Meet me tomorrow morning at the courthouse, and we'll get your marriage certificate sorted. After that, come to my house. My husband, Judge Hawk, will marry you." "Thank you, Sally." "Really," I said, relief flooding my voice. "See you at 9 a.m. sharp," she added before hanging up. The next morning, I arrived at the courthouse to find Claire waiting for me, looking radiant in a simple yet elegant dress. I straightened my tie nervously, but the sight of her immediately put me at ease. "You're beautiful," I said, my voice catching slightly. "And you're dashing," she replied, smiling as she took my hand. Sally greeted us warmly and quickly helped us navigate the paperwork for our marriage certificate. "Let's head to my place," she said, ushering us out. "Judge Hawk is waiting for you." At Sally's home, the ceremony was intimate and perfect. Judge Hawk officiated, his tone both professional and heartfelt. As Claire and I exchanged vows, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and love for the woman standing before me. When we sealed our promises with a kiss, Sally clapped her hands joyfully. "Congratulations, Mr. and Mrs. Kevin Walker," she announced, her face glowing with happiness. With New Year's Eve approaching, Claire and I found ourselves looking forward to a big gala that many prominent businesspeople would attend. It was the perfect opportunity for us to step into the spotlight as a married couple. "Honey," I said one evening, "do you want to go to the party of the year? It's our chance to be seen together. I want to show off my beautiful wife. Plus, who knows, our ex-spouses might even be there." Claire's eyes lit up with excitement. "Kevin, I'd love that. I want everyone to know you're my husband. Let's do it." When the night of the party arrived, Claire looked breathtaking in a sleek black gown that turned every head in the room. Her confidence and grace shone as we mingled with the crowd. On the packed dance floor, I suddenly heard a familiar voice exclaim, "Oh my God, it's Kevin." I turned to see Karen standing nearby, looking both surprised and curious. Smiling politely, I replied, "Good evening, Karen. Happy New Year." I placed a hand on Claire's back. "Karen, this is my wife, Claire." Karen's husband stepped forward, extending a hand. "Bob," he said with a firm handshake. "Nice to meet you." Claire gave him her warmest smile. "Nice to meet you, Bob." "And you too, Karen." Karen's eyes shifted, betraying her discomfort at the introduction. As she tried to regain composure, Claire added with a hint of amusement, "Didn't we meet at Robson's restaurant on Old Route 40 a couple of months ago?" Bob shook his head. "No, that place is way too pricey for us," he said. Karen quickly changed the subject, but her unease was evident. Later in the evening, Claire leaned close to me, her lips brushing my ear. "Kevin, are you ready?" she whispered. "Ready for what?" I asked, puzzled. "Do you want to go home?" She smiled slyly. "No, Kevin. Are you ready for your revenge?" Before I could respond, she slipped something into my pocket, a piece of silky red lace. I glanced down and realized it was her underwear, folded neatly like a handkerchief. Loud enough for the nearby table to hear, she said with a playful laugh, "Happy New Year, darling." The room fell silent for a moment, and we heard the sound of Jim's chair scraping against the floor as he stood abruptly. His face was a mix of shock and anger as he turned toward us. Claire leaned into me, her voice low but brimming with satisfaction. "Who said revenge isn't sweet?" I kissed her, my heart swelling with pride and affection. "Happy New Year," I whispered back. Hand in hand, we left the party, the echoes of whispered gossip trailing behind us. It was a night I would never forget, a celebration of love, triumph, and a little well-earned justice.